Good morning. Thank you for joining me again today for our Come Follow Me study. My name is Ted. I have noticed in my own life that there is a great deal of strength in being angry. I can usually say things that I wouldn't normally be able to say and do things that I might not normally be able to do when I allow myself to get all wound up. Problem is, I have also noticed that when I act or speak through anger, I create about 10 times as many problems as I solve, some of which are remarkably difficult, if possible at all, to clean up. And so I've discovered through hard experience that the very best way to deal with things in life, challenging things in life, is to try to avoid being angry. And I've noticed that fear can work the same way. When I am afraid, I tend to act differently and do things differently, respond differently than I might normally act and do and respond. These are controlling agents that take us a different direction than what we would normally go. And so it's important for us to be mindful of this kind of thing. The polar opposite of using anger or fear in our lives is to use faith, to allow a trust in a divine being, a loving Heavenly Father who is interested in our well-being, to allow Him to step in and guide us through some of these difficult moments. I had an opportunity of this a few weeks ago. I was facing a group of decision makers who were dealing with some issues that were important to me. I was warned ahead of time that my perspective varied pretty wildly from theirs, but I was confident that I had truth on my side. I was confident, partially because the truth that I held in my heart was based around being a peacemaker. And some of the strong emotions from some of the others were not. And so before I went into this particular situation, I turned to my Heavenly Father with everything I had. I wish I did this more often, honestly. But in this case, I'm proud of myself. I did. I turned to my Heavenly Father and I said, please help me. I'm facing something that's going to be very challenging. It's several people against me is the way I was feeling. And I said, could you grant me the wisdom, the peace, love in this moment, that we can stand by truth rather than by fear or anger or frustration or whatever the other emotions were that would be in the room. And then I went and I faced this opportunity and I spoke boldly and I gave it all I had. And some very powerful emotions were used in response to my standing. But I felt no animosity at all, no anger, no frustration, no fear whatsoever. Rather, I had truth flowing through my heart. I just felt that we were on the right track. And I was able to share my thoughts very clearly, very grounded, very openly, with no worry whatsoever. And even, in fact, I was able to show some love to some of those in the room who felt very much differently than I did. And it was remarkable to see the change. I'm very grateful that Heavenly Father loves us enough that He will grant us the help that we need when we need it, if we will give Him what we do have available to us. The lesson that we're studying today is one of my all-time favorite lessons. I absolutely adore the story of David and Goliath. I love the faith of this young man. I love the courage that he shows. No anger, no fear, just bold strength. Strength that came from a history that he had with his Heavenly Father. The lesson is titled, With the Help of the Lord, I Can Overcome Any Challenge. And it says this: the story of David and Goliath is one of the best known stories in the Scriptures. Of course, we usually focus on David, but this time, as you study 1 Samuel 17, ponder also the words of other people in this chapter. What do you learn about them and their motives? What do you learn about David? How is he different? Your story, though not as well known as David's, is sure to include Goliath-sized challenges to overcome and opportunities to exercise faith in the Lord. What does David's example teach you about facing adversity in your story? You might also read President Camille L. Johnson's message, Invite Christ to Author Your Story, with one of your challenges in mind. Look for answers to questions like these. How does the Lord want me to view my challenges? How has he helped me in the past? How can I show that I trust him to write my story? You may already know that there are some tragic chapters later in David's story. If you had the opportunity to give David some advice after his battle with Goliath, what would you say? How might this advice apply to your life? I really love the tactic that they're recommending right here in the lesson, to think of advice that you might give to David with respect to what he's going to be facing in the future. And I might add, maybe also include people that you love and know in your own life. Think of advice that you might give them with regard to weaknesses, shortcomings, challenges, temptations that they will face in their life, and then see if you can employ that same advice for yourself. Might be a little revealing, maybe even a little uncomfortable, but typically we show a little more love, a little more patience with other people than we do ourselves, and there's some value in that if you really think about it. We're going to read most of 1 Samuel chapter 17, the story of David and Goliath, and I love, again, the opportunity to try to see things from the perspective of some of the other characters, not just David, as we study this. 1 Samuel 17, we're going to start with verse 3. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side. And there was a valley between them. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had an helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. The weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. And one bearing a shield went before him. To put into perspective what's being described here, verse 4 mentions that he was 6 cubits and a span in height. That works out to being about 9 feet 9 inches tall. And that is a monstrous human being. That is enormous. Now, there are some scholars out there who argue whether or not Goliath was truly almost 10 feet tall. I'm going to go with what the scriptures say. This works for me, and it works for the illustration of the story. It works for what they're trying to say here, what the Lord is presenting in keeping this story for us. Also, his mail, his coat of armor, it's chain mail, I'm guessing, weighs 5,000 shekels of brass. That works out to being about 125 pounds of chainmail alone. That is a huge coat of mail, and man, that would drown most people. I'm not sure many people could even lift it with as heavy as that is. Then it goes into the describing his staff of his spear. The staff of the spear was like a weaver's beam. It took me a little time to figure out what that was. A weaver's beam. This is the beam that goes along the top of the weaving device. And even though, if you look at him, a weaver's beam is pretty short. It's about 5 feet long. But the scholars believe that this is not talking about the length of his spear, the staff of his spear. It's talking about the girth. A standard spear used in war is going to be about 1 inch around in size. And a weaver's beam is twice that. So it's a huge staff that he's holding. And then it says the head of the spear was 600 shekels of iron in weight, and that's about 15 pounds. Again, a standard spear for war use, a weapon, is about 3 to 5 pounds. So a 15-pound head on that spear would be ridiculous. And I was reading some guy somewhere, he was talking about how he worked out the length of the spear would have to be so that the balance would be correct with that heavy of a spear head and that large of a spear body, the shaft of the spear. And I can't remember what he said exactly. It seemed like he was talking in the same neighborhood, about 10 feet long is what it would have to be, something like that. Just gargantuan. Amazing what this guy has. So we know what we have here is a significant foe. This is a tremendous challenge for anyone to face. No wonder people were afraid of him, right? Verse 8, and he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel and said unto them, why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am I not a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all of Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. And who could blame them? Israel didn't have a 10-foot tall champion to go out and face Goliath, and that's what they were expecting. But I love the way the lesson points out that each one of us is going to have Goliath-sized problems or challenges that we're going to face in our own lives. Because the solution to Goliath was not a man of his same stature, strength, and battle readiness. The solution to the problem was faith. And that is astounding. Something to keep in mind. Verse 12. Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse. And he had 8 sons. And the man went among men for an old man in the days of Saul. And the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to battle. And the names of his 3 sons that went to battle were Eliab, the firstborn, and next unto him Abinadab, and third Shammah. And David was the youngest, and the 3 eldest followed Saul, but David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near morning and evening, and presented himself 40 days. And Jesse said unto David his son, Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn, and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren. And carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of their 1,000, and look how thy brethren fare, and take their pledge. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. And David rose up early in the morning, and left the sheep with a keeper, and took and went, as Jesse had commanded him, and he came to the trench as the host was going forth to fight, and shouted for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. And David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage, and ran into the army, and came and saluted his brethren. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words. And David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were sore afraid. And the men of Israel said, Have ye seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him after this manner, saying, So shall it be done to the man that killeth him. And Eliab his eldest brother heard when he spake unto the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, Why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and the haughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. And David said, What have I now done? Is there not a cause? And he turned from him toward another, and spake after the same manner. And the people answered him again after the former manner. Unfortunately, this is quite often how it works. David's older brother is there, Eliab. Remember, we studied him. Even Samuel was very impressed with Eliab's stature, his standing, his charisma. But even Eliab is terrified to go and face Goliath, with good reason. I mean, nobody's going to hold that against him. Everyone is terrified of Goliath, apparently, except for David. But you would think that an older brother might approach his younger brother with protection or love. Hey, man, don't go out there. You're going to get yourself killed. Are you crazy? Stay here. Let me keep you safe. But instead, Eliab responds with anger and mocking. Unfortunately, that's quite often how it works. When we are to show faith in this world, when we are to live with boldness in our testimony that our Heavenly Father will be with us, quite often others will respond in anger and frustration and mocking. I wish it didn't work that way, but that is the reality of the world that we live in. The part that I have trouble understanding is how in the world David ever convinced Saul to let him go represent Israel. Now, I looked it up, and the scholars say David must have been between 13 and 15 when he faced Goliath. How in the world did he convince the king? to let him represent as the champion of Israel. That's the one that I don't understand. But clearly, the Lord's purposes needed to unfold here, and so he played a role, must have played a role in giving David the opportunity to go out. Verse 31,